Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Torn Tuesday, your weekly dose of all things Lord of the Rings. We have a very special show for you today, and this is an extra long episode because there's so much to talk about. There are always a bunch of wonderful, great projects that are always going on in officially, unofficially, tangentially, and not. And with all the latest news that we reported the last couple weeks from the unfortunate passing of Bernard Hill, King Theoden, and a wonderful tribute from all the actors and producers that joined us, to the huge, earth-shattering news of the Rings of Power teaser trailer and everything else. Last week, Andy Serkis announcing a Hunt for Gollum movie, Peter Jackson producing three movies, a Lego borrowed deer. There's just been so much news, so we thought we'd take this week to introduce you to a couple excellent projects that we're really personally excited about. And because of all the different time zones and the wonderful creative people involved, we had to record these in advance, these conversations, because everyone is super busy and the time zones are all weird and the air conditioner just kicked on. So we have two wonderful Kickstarter projects that you can back now. It's like the final week to support these Kickstarter projects. The first one coming up is a conversation with Eduardo and Greg, who created and directed the Blair Witch Project. And you might have seen a bunch of viral conversations about that on the socials this week. Well, we got them here because they've partnered with executive producer Mark Ordesky and Jane Fleming from Court 5, the folks that created and produced The Quest. So that's right, the executive producer of Lord of the Rings. The creators of The Quest have partnered with the Blair Witch guys to make a brand new fantasy world that has a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's got a board game, which is on Kickstarter. There's a virtual game that we're going to get into. There's a comic book. There's a podcast out that's telling the story. They've got all these different things telling a different part of the story. So I wanted to know more about how do you tell the story across multiple things, multiple technologies, right? And then secondly, so I hope you'll enjoy that conversation. And then secondly, we have a very awesome conversation with the director John Spira of this new documentary that is called The Life and Deaths of Christopher Lee. He has already produced it. It's done. Kickstarter is just being used to sell the DVDs, which will include bonus features and the full uncut new interview with Peter Jackson. But this is the first official documentary on the life and legend of Christopher Lee, who played Saruman. And he worked with the family of Christopher Lee themselves and all of his personal collaborators to set the record straight on the myths and legends that he himself fostered during his life. So we get into some amazing details on how the Saruman character really changed Christopher Lee's life, both for us as fans and for him as the person. So I hope you enjoy these two conversations with the creators of GLIM, which you can get now on Kickstarter. All the links are in the description below. And then stay tuned for an extra long conversation with the director of The Life and Deaths of Christopher Lee. Both all intensely creative, successful people bringing their passion to the TheOneRing community. So we appreciate their time. All right, so here's the first conversation with the creators of Blair Witch about their new fantasy world. Enjoy.
GLIM, a dice game played by the fairies of a forgotten world. In 2017, Blair Witch Project director Eduardo Sanchez found an unusual board game called GLIM at an estate sale. But with only a few faded cards depicting fairies, a deteriorated playmat, and no rules, it was impossible to tell how it was played. Then, in 2021, game designers Jen Ellis and Keith Baker showed Sanchez their own strange fairy collectible. Puppets of similar winged beings, and a handwritten set of rules for a dice game supposedly played on a fairy world called Hada. Intrigued, the trio dug into this mysterious lore and uncovered stories, reports, and images from all over the world. Now, after 3 years of painstaking research and a collaboration with visual artist Ren Lindroos and graphic designer Adi Slepak, Sanchez's new company, Emerald Anvil, is proud to present a recreation of this intriguing artifact. In this contemporary version of GLIM, players battle for control over the fairy planet Hada. Using unique faction strengths, players expand their power, thwart their enemies, and accumulate GLIM, the mysterious energy that allows the Hadin to fly using winged-shaped glyphs and battle with blades of solid light. Bring the world of GLIM to life by backing on Kickstarter now.
All right, first up, we got a wonderful conversation that we've been looking forward to for the last several weeks. As you know, TheOneRing.net just celebrated 25 years of being a community of Lord of the Rings fans, and that community has spread wide. And coincidentally, we got an email from executive producer Mark Ordesky of Lord of the Rings, who won all the Oscars and brought in that billions and billions of success with Peter Jackson. And he's got a brand new project. And so he sent me the link, and then I saw the names, and I'm like, wait, Ordesky is teamed up with the Blair Witch guys? So I'm happy to have them on the show today.
Very much so.
And today we've got Eduardo Sanchez and Greg Hale. Hey, guys.
Howdy, Justin. Hey, Clifford. How's it going?
Well, hello there.
Thanks
you
for
guys.
having us.
It's a pleasure. Just a pleasure to have you here. Because I'm excited to talk about tabletop gaming at any opportunity when I get the chance to do that on our live show, which is, not so often. We're usually talking about furry feet and dragon scales and other things, ancient hammers that Feanor used to make things that were magical. And you know what? Let's get to the tabletop conversation. This is exciting because now we get a really cool Kickstarter campaign that you guys still have running with a little bit more space to go before you get to the finish line. And we're introducing the world to something that Mark Ordesky believes in. And when he's tapping into the creative flow, we are there for that. So welcome aboard. And I'm so glad that you are here to tell us about GLIM, the fairy world of the Green Anvil and the fairyland of Hada. Is that how it's pronounced?
Yeah, or Hada. Either.
Hada.
Yep. It's actually a Spanish word for fairy, so Ed could probably say more how it's really pronounced. I say Hada.
Yeah, the H is silent, so it's
Hada.
yeah.
Hada.
That's even cooler sounding. There you go.
That's very cool. Well, we want to tell everyone in our audience immediately, look on Kickstarter, and you can type in the search bar right at the top, GLIM, G-L-I-M, short for Glimmer. And that, I think, is a play on language that you may or may not have deliberately built into the game title. Tell us about how GLIM, as a creative thing, came to you guys, because it's really cool.
Thank you very much. Yeah, GLIM is actually part of one of 4 platforms that we're have been launching to explore this world called Emerald Anvil, which, like you said, is a dangerous fairy realm of fairies who aren't really traditional fairies. This is very much more Game of Thrones or even Lord of the Rings in terms of like peril and stakes, as opposed to Tinkerbell, for sure. So we're exploring Emerald Anvil through 4 platforms, a podcast called Black Velvet Fairies that's already launched, the GLIM Kickstarter, which we can concentrate on today for sure. I think there's a lot of great Venn diagram crossover between GLIM and the Lord of the Rings crowd. The novel Journey to Hada drops on Tuesday, the 21st. I don't know when this is going to come out, but it's going to drop on the 21st.
Oh, that's cool. A full novel, a full narrative. I
Yep.
love that.
Yep.
Nice.
And then the fourth platform is a interactive storytelling game that's going to be based on Discord. That's going to start in sign up for it's going to start in June, and then we'll actually start the game in July. And hopefully all of the things in Emerald Anvil are going to be of interest to you guys. But concentrating on GLIM is awesome. It is a board game that we designed with Together Studios, which is Keith Baker and Jen Ellis, who live here in Portland, Oregon, same as me. Keith is kind of a rock star of the Dungeons and Dragons world. He created the Eberron campaign setting for Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, cool.
Him and Jen have made a bunch of great games, Illimat, Adventure Zone, Bureau of Balance, a lot of stuff that's been very successful Kickstarters. So we're doing GLIM as a board game as one of the ways of like telling the story. There's a lot of story in the game. It is a dice-based push your luck game with elements of deck building. We're presenting it as if actually the story is as if Ed found this old game at a
State sale.
state sale
Right.
and showed it to Jen and Keith, and they're like, "Oh, we happen to have our own weird fairy collectibles and these rules," and they kind of put it together, and we've developed it. So there's a little Blair Witchy, is it real story behind the game where we're presenting this as like a actual artifact from this.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's like found footage, but they're found ancient game artifacts.
Yeah,
That
it's
is
found
so
game.
cool.
It's a found game. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a found game. I love that idea.
Yeah. No, it's great. I mean, like Greg, he has, I mean, I played a little bit D&D. I was like, it was one of those situations where I didn't have friends that played D&D, unfortunately, but I would have loved to have done it. And I did a little bit of it in college. And now my kids are into it. But Greg, grew up on it, and he built, he's been kind of the dungeon master. He's just been like this, he just knows how to build worlds, and he's had this world of Emerald Anvil in his head for so many years. And we finally like pulled the trigger, and we're like, this is, let's just go out and try to do it and try to, make it. And again, and we were talking about it earlier before we started the interview, the idea of like, controlling it ourselves for a certain amount of time before the big boys come in and start, kind of telling us things that maybe we don't want to hear. And where the big money comes in, and now you have to kind of follow certain rules. Like we love the independence, like how we did Blair Witch. And we always had the idea of like making this like very a multimedia kind of entertainment experience, And I think Greg, we both, I mean, Greg's done most of the work, and he's just very he's just super talented in creating these kind of crazy things that just, I don't know how they pop out of his head, but they do. I'm kind of scared of him actually sometimes.
They don't just pop out of your guys' heads, like they have a lasting impact. I mean, so that's what's really interesting about this. You said something about dark elves, and recently we were just talking about how we found some quotes from Tolkien where he expressed a dislike of Shakespeare because Shakespeare made the Dark Forest family friendly, and he wasn't a big Tolkien enjoyed the concept of the dark forest where dark things can happen, and he made an effort to bring that back into Lord of the Rings. So is that kind of is that a core theme to this game in this world?
Well, I think one of the core themes of Emerald Anvil is that it is a fantastical setting, right? It's fairies. They don't call themselves fairies. They call themselves Hadin. And it's not a traditional fae world. Like it's not just magic and magic explains everything. There's actually, if you dig a little bit into Emerald Anvil and the world of Hada, it's almost like a science fiction world building in terms of there's a reason that they fly, and there's a reason they can make these blades of light out of their hand. There's a reason that they interact with Earth. There's a reason that they bring humans to Hada, right? We tried to kind of, it's Tolkien-esque in that we tried to have everything make sense, that things weren't just necessarily explained by, oh, it's a fairy world and the magic is going to just explain anything that you don't understand. So the theme really is, once the kids, the through line of the main story, which is the novel, which is, fantasy 101. We're not reinventing any fantasy wheels here. Two kids, Morgan and Orion De Leon, which are actually amalgams of my kids and Ed's kids, and we have a cool story about Ed's kids' involvement in the whole thing. But these two kids, Morgan and Orion De Leon, Cuban American, based on Ed's background, get teleported to this really dangerous fairy realm called Hada. And not dangerous because it's like, monsters running around and dragons trying to kill you or whatever, but the Hadin are just like humans in terms of like the capacity for good is there and the capacity for not giving a shit is there, but also the capacity for zealotry and horrible violence is there, right? And the kids are the focal point of the zealous violence, right? Their arrival kicks off these different prophecies, religious prophecies. So the focus,
the voice from the outer world.
right? Again, we're not.
I'm joking, but
No. It's true. We're not inventing anything, new in the basic tropes. Hopefully, it's new in the way we're exploring, fairydom and the powers that would explain the Fae and how these kids are connected to it.
But it gets pretty dark, man. There's some dark, like politically, it gets very hairy, and and it's not, again, it's not like, it's not for kids. I mean, we would love to have, obviously there's different levels of storytelling. I think some of it can be for young adults and stuff, but once they get to Hada, there's like some serious consequences, and there is a darkness. There is, it's weird because like we've been trying to do something that our kids can watch, because we're always doing horror movies and just really dark stuff, and we thought that this would be, and it is, it would be an opportunity to do something for kids, and it just become, and there is a entrance into like not really young kids, but I think young adults, I think teenagers would love to get into this, but it is not, it's not a kid's story, and but now all our kids are getting older, so now they can, it's fine for them to watch it. But it's just strange how we, the initial kind of, remember, Greg, I mean, the initial idea was like, let's just do something that we can show our kids, that we can, without waiting for them to be adults, and I think we have, but there is, for us, there's always, I mean, if you have good, you have, bad, and I think, like Lord of the Rings is like a perfect example of how, how dark it can get, and then how hopeful and amazingly optimistic it can get, so that, I think that's, Emerald Anvil has all of that.
What I'm immediately attracted to is the cosmology of your world that you very succinctly give us some details of on the Kickstarter page. And like Arda, which was the physical world that Tolkien had created by the music of the Valar and the Maiar singing in the great singing creation of all of Arda, you guys have a cosmology that presents, and let me read this, the realm of Hada is actually a planetary disk that has a green dwarf star embedded in the very center. So it's reconceptualizing a flat Earth with a green dwarf star in the middle, and all the Hadin refer to this green dwarf star as the Emerald Anvil. It's the source of their power. It's the source of how they can conjure or develop weapons or the task of flight. And it's really, really cool because, like any fantasy nerd, I open up pages of Narnia or Middle Earth and I'm looking at these maps. That's the first thing I instinctually zoom in and on is, oh, there's a fantasy world with a cool map and a built-in cosmology. And I think it's really neat what you've already designed as the background for a card and dice game. It's really cool.
Yeah, thank you. But thank you very much. I mean, it's definitely deep nerddom for sure. And it's funny that you mentioned the map, because Ed and I created.
Oh yeah, it's great.
a story world for the ABC show The Quest, which Mark and Jay, you know,
Right.
created, executive produced, co-created, and executive produced, and they asked us to help create the fantasy part of it. The story building on the fantasy side was primarily me and Ed, and it was probably the easiest job I ever had because it was literally just like Dungeons and Dragons, and the first thing that I started with was the map. Right? That's
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
such a Tolkien thing. I mean, obviously, none of this would exist without Tolkien, right?
Yeah.
You know, Dungeons and Dragons comes directly out of Tolkien. So for
Mhm.
me, you know, there's like this perfect storm, and Ed too, with less on the Dungeons and Dragons side. But for me, it's like a perfect storm of Tolkien and his world building, Dungeons and Dragons, and homebrew, you know, campaigns and stuff like that, where you get inspired by Tolkien and then you apply that to your own world building. So you start kind of start being trained as a world builder in like eighth grade because of Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Mhm.
Dungeons and Dragons because it gives you those tools to build worlds. And then with Star Wars, which you know, me and Ed are both, you know, gigantic Star Wars fans.
Me too.
Yeah, we both are filmmakers because of Star Wars, like 100%. And one of the things that Ed and I have always talked about in relation to Star Wars and Blair Witch, and then Emerald Anvil too, but Star Wars and Blair Witch, the connection is when I was a kid, and I think Ed is pretty much the same way, even when I was 11 years old when the first movie came out, I never looked at Star Wars as just one movie. I always thought, oh, this is a universe and the movie is one part of it, but the comic books and the albums and even the action figures to me were all like, oh, there's other stories happening out here. This and the movie is just one part of them. So I think I kind of grew up because of Tolkien, because of Dungeons and Dragons, because of Star Wars, just kind of naturally thinking about stories in kind of a multi-platform way.
Mhm.
So when we started making Blair Witch, we had the story that we knew was going to be in the film, but we had come up with all this lore, and we were like, man, we want to put this out in front of people, not for marketing, right? And that's really why the whole marketing genius of Witch ended up being genius. Wasn't because we were geniuses, it's because we were Star Wars geeks, and we just wanted to put these other story elements in front of people to really to entertain them and give them another look into the world.
Yeah, in the mid '90s, there was a Star Wars offshoot called Shadows of the Empire,
Mhm.
and that was the first time that I, like, you know, and Greg is exactly right, like, you know, because Star Wars was the novels and the, you know, the comics, and there was all these other stories that were like just you know, just kind of flowing from the movie. And Shadows of the Empire was like the same thing, but with no movie. Like, it was a novel, it was comic books, it was a video game, and it didn't do great. It didn't do really well, but for Star Wars nerds like me, I mean, I loved it, and every bit of whatever was the video game told a different story, a different angle, different you know, point of view of the main story that was happening. And when we were, you know, I was one of the guys that like helped with you know, with the website, the original website, when we were still like trying to edit, we were editing the movie and stuff. I got a lot of inspiration from the, you know, from Star Wars, because that was the only thing that, at least to my knowledge, had been done like that, where like the story is segmented into different sections, and to really know the whole story, you have to go and look at all these things. So once we started doing the website, our whole, you know, we just kind of went, you know, naturally into the idea of like the website needs to tell a different, you know, a story, another angle of the movie. And luckily we ended up with, you know, artists in a company that was very open to, like, you know, just taking chances with marketing. And we were able to do comic books and, you know, novel, and, you know, a book about like just a case, you know, supposedly written by a detective. And you know, the Sci-Fi Channel special, which was like a documentary about just the legend. And so, you know, that we got lucky that we were able to do that. But, you know, we always felt that like storytelling, you know, marketing is so crass and so in your face these days, and the idea of like spreading the word of this this IP, this central story with other entertainment is like to me it's like it makes sense. It all makes all the sense in the world. And that's the stuff that we love. So we with Blair Witch, that was a way we headed out, and we went. And the same thing with Emerald Anvil. Like it's always been this idea of like, does it exist in one media form or another? And hopefully, knock on wood, we'll be able to do more novels and a television show and maybe some movies and whatever it is. I'm saying? Like we want to like kind of spread it. We think that that the world is deep enough and rich enough to be able to take advantage of it, and for get inspiration from it for hopefully many years to come.
You guys embraced technology early and weren't afraid to put different parts of the story here. I remember, my little sister was too young to watch Blair Witch in the theaters because, it was she could only watch G-rated movies, but she stumbled on the Sci-Fi Channel special and that hooked her, So these different touch points, whether it was online, on TV, being all part of that, this coming decade feels like it's for fantasy. I mean, we've got, multi seasons of Rings of Power on Prime Video. Warner Brothers just announced a whole slate of movies. There's a video game company now owns the rights. So fantasy is like really, if the last decade was Marvel and Star Wars, this decade is really going to be about Lord of the Rings and fantasy. So I guess why do this project right now? Is that one of the reasons why? Because fantasy seems to be going. Also, didn't a D&D game just sell out Madison Square Garden? Like,
wow, I don't know, but that's awesome.
I didn't know, yeah.
Yeah, there's some D&D game on the East Coast, and then Critical Role is one of the most popular things still on the internet. So like there's all this energy toward fantasy. So how do you guys like start to think about the technology, what stories to place in different forms, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I wish, I think first of all, I think if you're chasing, even though I'm hesitant to use the word, but because it seems a little pretentious, but it's the right word. If you're trying to chase the zeitgeist or like anticipate what the zeitgeist is, I think you're always going to miss the mark. I think you have to do something that you're motivated to do because of your own creative motivations. I mean, this idea started 12 years ago because my oldest kid, Cupid, who's now 18, when they were 6, they were super into Tinkerbell. And I watched all the Tinkerbell movies, which are actually not bad as little standalone straight-to-video movies. But I really wanted to connect with them, meet them where they were as a fantasy fan, so to speak. And I was like, well, what's a fantasy thing that would work for me that's fairy-based? And I made up a character, a fairy character that started interacting with my kid through letters, and then started burying things in the backyard, and we did little photo shoots and stuff. And so it was all about like this tangible connection between a kid, this happened to be my kid at the time, and a fairy world. But that wasn't like the normal, you just get transported to the fairy world. And then Ed and I started running that through the lens of, well, what would those characters be and how deep would that world be? And started combining aspects of his kids and my kids. So this has been a 12-year-long process that that we've gone back and forth on for a long time, kind of fleshing out the world until about probably 3 years ago. Ed was like, look, if we're going to do this, we have to treat it like a real project. We can't just brainstorm about it. Because look, Ed and I make horror films or horror TV shows. That's what, if we send our agents or our manager something that's not horror, they're like, what the hell are you guys doing? Nobody's going to give me and Ed, $200 million to make a giant fairy epic film. So we're like, well, how can we start telling this story in a way that it's not about wanting to control it or wanting to own it, but it's just like, how can we put it out there in a meaningful way? So we, raised this is all very grassroots. It's very much like, Blair Witch was back in the day, very grassroots, very indie. We raised a little bit of money. The first people that we reached out to were Mark and Jane, because if we're gonna try to, start down in the path of epic fantasy, who better to have on your team than Mark and
Oh
Jane?
yeah.
And so we kind of like pitched them on it, got them involved, and then we've really just kind of been building this kind of, like Avengers team of like, our friend Mike Manello and Jamie Nash came in to help us with the podcast, because a podcast is something you can do kind of on the cheap. I actually co-wrote the novel with Ed's kid Bianca, and we actually wrote that like a role-playing game.
Wow.
I created the world, and then we got Bianca basically plays the role of Morgan, and we got on a Google Doc together, and I put scenarios in front of them and said, "What does Morgan do?" And they responded as Morgan, and that's how we did the first draft. So then we did the board game GLIM with Keith and Jen. Again, just kind of like talking people into doing things, because people do respond to the world. I say, homicidal fairies, and people are in. And then the interactive storytelling game came really from Mark and Jane too, because they have connections with people who have uh, built and Justin, we talked about this prior to the call, a somewhat controversial thing amongst fantasy fans, but the interactive storytelling game, which is called Battle for Hada, ultimately is backed by NFTs, but we are looking at the NFTs as like a digital collectible, as a thing that has a persistent digital reality that you can latch things onto. It's really kind of like a giant game of Risk, but instead of 42 countries, you have 10,000 hexes spread out along this whole fairy world. You're going to get a piece of that fairy world, and we're going to give away 1,000 pieces to hopefully to fantasy fans, of which we hope would a lot of which will be OneWing.net people. And then you're going to get on Discord, and you're going to take part in an interactive storytelling thing, and you're going to actually help create the canon story world. You're going to reverse engineer the map of the world that the kids get teleported to in the first novel. And
That's fascinating.
that's the super simple
Wow.
And it becomes canon, right? Like
just canon storytelling. Yeah, it all, but your decisions as a player in the game will create canon story. And then this is a deep dive Dungeons and Dragons thing. Do you guys remember, if you're Dungeons and Dragons guys, do you remember the Greyhawk Gazetter? Like
Mm.
very old school. Because Greyhawk was the first campaign setting, right? That was Gygax's campaign
Yes.
setting, was Greyhawk. And they had this thing that was the Greyhawk Gazetter, which to me as a kid kind of felt like this, like almost like a Bible, because it was like this very detailed thing of like basically the geopolitics of Greyhawk, right? That's so we're
Oh.
so the Battle for Hada game is basically going to provide all the data for the Emerald Anvil Gazetter, right? So we'll have two storytelling sessions, and then we're going to we're going to create this gazetter of this attack happened here, and this cultural thing happened here, and this geopolitical thing happened here, with maps and all that kind of stuff, all based on the decisions that the players are going to be making in this
Oh.
based game.
yeah, that's cool.
Wow. Which
How
is
do you start to
you're-
keep track of all that?
well, I mean, yeah, because I wanted to differentiate this other game, the story building game, compared to the dice and card game that we're talking about on Kickstarter. They are distinct. Yes.
Yeah, two different things. So everything is standalone. You can listen to the podcast, Black Velvet Fairies, which we're 10 episodes into a 13 episode arc. Actually, the 10th episode, I think, drops on Tuesday.
Nice.
That's all standalone. You could listen to that and just have that be one story, but their story directly connects to the story of the novel, which you could also just read as a standalone thing. You can definitely play the board game as just a standalone board game, because it's, once you understand it, the setup is really simple. The board is like kind of a very broad like map in a way of the world of Hada.
It's cloth. That's cool. You lay out this cloth playing area. It's really
Yeah,
cool. Yeah.
it is really truly, and I can definitely say this because like I've mostly just kind of like helped herd the creative on the board game, but Jen and Keith just killed it on the board game. It's a super cool mechanic that I've actually never seen, where you're rolling dice and placing tokens to win cards, and then you get those cards. So each each round you're getting more powers based on which cards you're winning. So it's really cool, and it's based on the 4 dominions that are in the novel, because the kids have a very, and that's why there's no map in the novel, right? Which is like exactly like you. My temptation was like, God, I really want to put a map at the beginning, but the kids don't know the map, right? Because it's written from the first person, from Morgan's POV. Morgan doesn't have the knowledge to do a map. They see maps, but they don't have the knowledge to put a map in the book, yet. So the map, you can go to emeraldanvil.com, go to the battle for Hada, and this is a total interactive map that shows you where all the different dominions are and the history of 36 different dominions, that kind of like that. So that's the deep dive geekery, map stuff. But yeah, the game is super cool. And I do want to, while we're just talking about the game, I do want to bring up, and this is a special thing, not just for OneRing.net people, but I got a feeling that will be who will respond. So we're going to add a tier. If you go to the Kickstarter right now, we have these different reward tiers. And a couple of them of the higher level ones are Blair Witch ones, where Ed and I are giving away some memorabilia, and there's a Q&A with us and all this kind of stuff that nobody's got yet, but I'm sure they will before the end. But because of this interview with you guys, and getting invited to share this with OneRing.net, which we so appreciate, we're going to add a Mark Ordesky fairy ring, see, play on the ring, fairy ring tier to the GLIM Kickstarter, where Mark is going to give away 3 or 4 pieces of his personal Lord of the Rings collection.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Pull items from his personal collection and sign them and give them as part of the tier. So like, and we don't know exactly what they're going to be, but I do know that one of them will be the sideshow collectible Gothmog on the Battle Warg, that big, Gothmog on the Battle Warg. Like, Mark's going to give his personal one away and sign it to whoever does that tier. And then
my gosh,
he's going to go through his collection and pull out, 2 or 3 other items and give those away. So we're going to add that tier this week. So maybe by the time this is on OneRing.net, it'll be up. So that'll be a reward tier, the Kickstarter from the Mark Ordesky tier.
Wow. You're killing me, Larry. You're killing me, Larry, as to quote a popular radio commercial here in Southern California. This is really cool to hear. I'm excited by tabletop game designs. This particular objective, the objective of the players, working with large, beautifully designed tarot cards that are just as big, a big format, which is something we all appreciate. If you play Parks, the National Parks game, people love those big, oversized cards that represent all the national parks. And now you've got the same representing really cool characters from different areas of Hada. And then you roll octohedrons. Let's give a big shout out to all the nerds out there who know what an octohedron is, okay? If you ever purchased the original Jumanji board game and bought that home to play with your little kids, it has an 8-sided dice in it. Very specific, but all the Dungeons and Dragons nerds know what 8-sided dice are, but the general gaming populace is probably ready to be brought into this. But you place your cards around this cloth fabric in your game, and then you are making bids to try to get control of these cards, and then you roll dice to see if certain dice combinations will reflect what you need so that your influence discs can be put on the cards. You can take control of that card. Is that how it works?
was better than I could have
That's
expected.
how it works. See, I'm sorry, I'm a super gamer nerd, and I think in terms of game design all the time. But
Yeah.
let's get into the Kickstarter ecosystem because it really has dramatically changed the world of board game publishing since COVID. And I'm as guilty as anybody.
Yeah.
When we were on lockdown, oh, look, there's a $147 board game called Wonderland's War. And it's about Alice in Wonderland having battle factions and they're all fighting in Wonderland.
Yeah.
Hugely popular.
Yeah.
I got it delivered 2 years later after COVID, and I haven't even opened up the box yet. Okay. I'm telling you, it's crazy. But I mean, there's a lot of successful stories of gaming publishers who couldn't crack the puzzle in the regular way of designing, developing, and getting a company to distribute. So doing it this way is much more favorable for you guys, isn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean and I didn't even know this. I had kickstarted personally, like the Kickstarter account that we're using for GLIM is like the Emerald Anvil account that Ed and I created.
Hmm.
You know, it's like it doesn't show any of the history, but I've personally backed a bunch of mostly board games
Yeah.
on Kickstarter, and I didn't even know it was that big. But you've got all these games, like Gloomhaven and Frosthaven and
Hmm.
uh,
Yep.
humongous games. Um,
they they go ape shit. I'm sorry to abuse language on my own show, but the audiences go crazy on Kickstarter for these games. Look at
yeah.
what happened to Skyrise from Roxley Games. I even got a copy of that. It's really cool. As soon as we're done recording and talking here, I'm gonna go and buy a copy of Glim right here because I'm a big sucker for Kickstarter games. And you guys have really succeeded in tapping into that because the audience is eager on Kickstarter
Yeah, they're there
for these games.
Oh, yeah.
sure. And Jen and Keith are like, very, very well respected in that world. Our fulfillment company is called Crown Fulfillment here, also in Portland. They've done a ton of Kickstarter, so we have a great team on the Kickstarter. I think the page looks great, and the game really truly is a lot of fun. Very simple to learn. It's deep. The strategy can actually get pretty deep,
Hmm.
but very simple to learn. We've play tested the heck out of it, and most of the people who played it, you play one round and you get it. It's pretty straightforward mechanic, which is a lot of fun because a lot of these games are hard to digest.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I play some
Yep.
like board games, but some of them are a little hard to digest.
I'll back you up on that. There's another one that I bought on Kickstarter based on witchcraft and potions, and it's called Septima. And it is the 3.5 hour, 4 hour marathon of a board game to get through with unbelievable
I ain't got time
components.
to
It just
learn all
goes on
that.
and on and on. But what I want to ask you guys about is you can play your game in half an hour, in an hour. It's
Yeah,
you think?
once you know the game, you could play a single round because it's you can play as many rounds as you want.
Hmm.
You can structure the game however you want. Once you know the game, if you wanted to play a one round game, you could probably do it in a half an hour. I would say
Okay.
our suggestion is that it's a 3 round game. And a 3 round game, once you know the game, will probably take you about an hour.
Mm, that's perfect. That's perfect. For a tabletop, that's the sweet spot.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
great.
yeah, because like a lot of those games, like guys were saying, is that you learn the rules and you don't play it for a couple of months and you come back and you're like, oh my God, I gotta learn this whole thing again. So, yeah, I think Greg did a great job and the designers just to keep it as easy to learn as possible.
Yeah, and the setup is like 5 minutes, maybe. There's like not a lot of do this and separate that, and which I love. Like I love those kind of games. I mean, I'm obsessed with Dune. Dune Imperium right now is the game that I'm like
Yeah.
ridiculously obsessed with.
Yeah, that's a great game.
Setup of that is like divide these cards and do that, and everybody's got 20 different things, which I love. But our game is not that. Our game is GLIM is very simple, very easy to set up, very easy to understand, but deep strategy and deep lore, right? Like the
Oh yeah.
lore in the game touches on. There are little hints. I will say this: there are little hints in the board game of stuff that's probably not going to happen for 4 or 5 novels. But
Oh, wow.
there are hints in there of stuff that is happening in the world that will be revealed later that the game is giving you like a little glimpse of.
I appreciate that you are that far-sighted in your game design elements. That's appreciated by all nerds on all levels. That's really
Well,
cool. That's cool.
especially Star Wars nerds, and Ed could talk about this more than I could. The whole thing with like canon and not canon, extended universe, not extended universe was with Star Wars, and like at some point they just abandoned all this content that like people loved and like, oh, that doesn't count anymore. I thought was like super weird.
That's wrong, man. I mean, I'm still reading the original, the classic, timeline because I'm like, the hell with it. That's what I started and that's what I'm, continuing on. But yeah, I mean, that's our hope is that we can keep it, keep it real and like keep it, let's not counteract stuff that we have already, set up. And because it's very frustrating for fans when you're like, you spent all this time learning this thing and then all of a sudden, oh no, we're gonna go, that's all bull crap. That's fantasy from the world. I'm like, no, man, I mean, you told me it was canon before, I mean, again, it's a super nerdy kind of, thing, but it's super frustrating. It just doesn't, it makes you like not want to be a part of it anymore because you're like, you're going to pull the rug from under, I'm going to start caring about this again. And then you're going to pull the rug from under me again. It's very frustrating for us fans.
Well, yeah, I wanted to touch on that, but because I know you guys are busy and you're doing conventions and things like that. But to that point, like, I feel like
don't let me forget to ask you about Gen Con. Don't let me forget to ask you about that. Okay.
I feel like there's there's this idea that a lot of storytelling, a lot of fantasy wants to come from top down. Like there's a all-knowing creator, whether it's Tolkien or George Lucas or whatever, and you're not allowed to play. And if you start playing and you get too successful, we'll throw all the EU stuff away. So how do you guys like? I love this idea that you were touching on with the Discord and the digital game, and then with this game where you're encouraging fans to create in this world from day one. So how important is the act of community creation? And like, do you expect like people will take this in directions you didn't anticipate, and then you can go that route?
We hope. And also, I mean, again, to talk, because I know Greg and I have talked about this, is like, I think Star Wars, when it was early on, when the internet and YouTube and stuff, like they kind of came down hard on people using the fan films and all that stuff. But then, somebody came up with the idea of like, why don't we embrace the fan films and have an award and all that stuff. And I gave an award one time in one of the celebrations, like to the, the best fan film or whatever of the year. But you have to let the audience, especially now when the tools are so, readily available, you got to let them play, man. You got to let them play in the sandbox in some way. And that's the way, I mean, even with Blair Witch, like we love when people are like I'm at a convention right now and some guy spent like 10 minutes giving me this theory of who he thinks was, and I'm like, yeah, that's beautiful. That's perfectly possible. You know what I mean? Like we love the idea of like, spreading the lore, and like, especially with Blair Witch, because it's horror. So there is a certain amount of mystery. You don't want to know everything. There's not, that you don't want to, give all the answers, because then it becomes, it loses the fear factor. But, with this, I mean, I think Greg, from the very beginning, when we started talking about it, was that we have to like, let the fans interact and be part of the thing. That's why I'm so excited about the part where like, people are actually going to be able to be part of the canon. That's to me, it's amazing,
It's very cool indeed.
Yeah.
Really cool.
Yeah, I mean even writing the novel as kind of like a role-playing game with Bianca was kind of like that. Like Bianca definitely came up with things as a character. I've never been a 14-year-old Hispanic girl. They have. So they were coming up and making decisions and coming up with things that I would have never come up with that made the story so much richer. And we're hoping that happens, with the whole canon story world. And and our idea is that as we get, hopefully, as we get bigger in success and we start building a community, we're hoping that we make it more interactive instead of less. Because right now, with the resources that we have, we kind of have to control it a little bit more, just because we have less ability to manage things branching out. But we're hoping that in success, like especially with the interactive storytelling stuff, that becomes very open-ended, right? That we're putting things in front of people and letting them go off on their own track. And of course, we have to pick what's canon, right? But the idea is that you have the chance of creating canon story as a fan. And the only thing that I can think of uh Star Wars wise that does that really is like the 501st, the costuming club, which I used to be a member of. My stormtrooper armor is basically right above me in the attic. Is, and at first they were like, Lucas like came down on the costuming club. They were like busting guys for like making their own armor and stuff. And then finally somebody at Lucasfilm was like, this is dumb. We should be doing the opposite. And now I guess the 501st is canon storytelling. The 501st Legion was Vader's like personal, legion.
And people create their own costumes and then create their own mythology around the character that they're playing, and now they're getting cast in these TV shows like The Mandalorian to be their characters.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I went and bought a tiki mug and a comic book from a guy who's like a background mercenary character in The Mandalorian, and Lucasfilm actually gave him the ability to go and like start telling his own stories with this mercenary character. So yeah, I mean, obviously, Star Wars, Harry Potter, on a lot of levels, but Star Wars for somebody like me, obviously, Star Wars is the holy grail of this stuff, right? If what Ed and I have created or are in the process of creating with Emerald Anvil touches on any of that energy with Star Wars, that's the thrill, right? That's what you, as the 11-year-old geek boy, still very much alive in me, is wanting, right? It's just give me a little bit of that world and somebody wanting to be in that world. That's what we're going for.
Very cool. That's very cool. One of the actors who was one of the 13 dwarves in The Hobbit, he had, after the success of the New Line Hobbit trilogy, he had asked if his character could be something that he could work with. I won't name which dwarf or which actor it was. I shouldn't do that. But he was declined by New Line Cinema to take his separate character and have lore building and another fictional pathway of what happened with his dwarf from the time of the end of The Hobbit to the time of the orcs and the Balrog destroying Moria.
Oh, wow.
And he wanted to have like travel diaries and little extended side adventures that his character would have in the timeline of Middle-earth between point A and point B. And unlike your friend who was a background player and got permission from Lucasfilm, New Line Cinema said no.
Yeah.
Putting the kibosh on that.
That's too bad.
It doesn't always work the same for everybody. And really nice to see that kind of generosity and openness from Lucasfilm happening for some of these other
and that's what I was
That's
saying,
great.
that you guys starting from that level with this project, Emerald Anvil, and the Kickstarter and the digital game and everything, you guys starting from a level of like, please interact, create, interact. I mean, kind of already sets this in a motion. So wherever this goes, and the big corporations come in and insert their influence, you've already established this baseline of creativity that's expected out of the creators and of the fandom.
Yeah, I mean that's the hope. I mean, look, we hope the big guys are interested. So someday, we would love to be in a position of saying no, but obviously we'd like to have the level of success. I mean, look, I'm a filmmaker. Ed and I are filmmakers. Star Wars is still, the idea of like making a movie of this one day, of course, that's what we want. A movie or a TV series or a console video game, some big giant epic expression of it. Yeah, of course that's what you want. We're just trying to have fun along the way and like bring the fans into it, and hopefully build a community that does care about from the very beginning and let them be a part of it is the idea.
Right on. You guys definitely have your hearts in the right place, and I can tell now why Mark Ordesky was ready to, bring it for you guys. It's really quite thrilling, and you've got more time. We've got a bit more time for the end of your Kickstarter package for people to, contribute, support the project. And not so long ago, you were chosen as Project We Love by Kickstarter. So you guys. Your profile on Kickstarter is increasing. It's great.
Yeah. It's so it's going to go through May 31st at 6:57, which is 1857, military time. And there's actually a story-based reason for that is in the podcast, like why we're ending it at 1857.
1857 has a magic number connotation to something specific in the world. Wow.
Yeah.
You guys
going on.
That's extra clever to be adding in those details. Very clever indeed.
Yeah,
I'm so down.
Cares.
Yeah,
Having the detail is one thing. People caring about the detail is another, so we'll see.
It's coming.
It just has to do with the quality of storytelling, and you guys have a proven track record of just telling great stories that people latch onto.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. And really, again, thank you so much for having us on.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure.
Lord of the Rings fans, Tolkien fans, that's where it all starts, So if we can get people, from OneRing.net to be into this, I think we'd be golden. So we really truly appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. And again, Mark Ordesky level, Fairy Ring level, Lord of the Rings. Starting next week. So it won't be I don't know, when is this going to be on anyway?
It'll be on Tuesday. So we'll put a link in the description to the Kickstarter, and they'll make sure by Tuesday evening when this airs, this level will be live.
We'll try to have that tier up.
Yeah, we should do it. We should
by Tuesday.
Yeah.
That's terribly exciting. Really exciting, guys. And I'm so appreciative of you stepping away from your busy convention and everything you guys are working on. Thank you for your generosity and your time today, guys. It's great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Yes. Excellent. Well done. Have a great time.